Welcome back to The Big Picture. We're talking about the recent legislation that legalizes the recreational use of marijuana with Matt Smith in studio from the Prevention Focus organization and Elise Bergio from the law firm of Barclay Damon here in Western New York. Here in Western New York, Assembly Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes stated that, and I'm quoting, "This social justice initiative will provide equity to positively transform disenfranchised communities of color for the better," close quote. So, Elise, have legal issues surrounding the sale and possession of marijuana been more of an issue for minorities, as Crystal Peoples-Stokes just said, for their minority community, at least as you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I just talked to Senator Cooney of the Rochester. He's a New York State senator, and he actually gave me a very interesting statistic because obviously different localities have different rates in which incarceration for minorities occurs. And he said that Blacks and Latinos are 16 times more likely to be incarcerated for marijuana crimes than any other race. And I think that's a really powerful statistic when we talk about social equity and why it was so important in this bill.
What do you think, Matt?
Oh, she's absolutely right. I mean, there's a disproportionality to enforcement. And history has shown us that there's much more harsh penalties and a greater percentage of people who get penalized for the same crimes in the different groups. So that's all very, very true.
All right, so now, Elise, this means that those with prior convictions can get their record expunged. Was that something that's happened elsewhere, and what does this really mean?
Sure. So expungement has happened in other places. It's not necessarily been part of the original bills, but it's usually happened at least afterwards. In New York, we're talking about having automatic expungement, meaning that crimes will automatically be removed from the record. I don't think that these have all been vet through in terms of the process of how this will happen. So we don't have necessarily a platform right now that says, hey, this is going to happen for you by X day. But it is really encouraging that the Office of Cannabis Management is up and running. And hopefully we see some really rapid movement on this expungement process.
What do you think is that a good thing? Do you feel?
Well, if we've made the reality this way now, it seems like it would only be fair to go about it in that way, especially for people that is the only crime.
That is the only crime that we're talking about.
Right.
Possession of marijuana. People should understand that as well. I think that's an important distinction when they talk about eliminating it. And also, Matt, you mentioned before, and I think this is a good point, what to do about the education issue, that all to do before this with smoking, for example,
Sure.
was a matter of educating people about the use and what the dangers are and so forth. Now, I think this, or alcohol,
Right.
the same kind of thing. So I feel like this might be an education issue as to how to deal with the legalization of marijuana.
Well, I think that it's a very important point. I mean, in prevention, law is a big shaper of people's attitudes and beliefs, and those attitudes and beliefs ultimately lead toward behavior. We have been moving for several years now towards relaxation of these laws and now the elimination of them here. And that does provide with it a message that young people can't help but miss. So now we need to really make sure we pivot to focus on other reasons why they need to be careful. And I hope that everyone, no matter what side you are on the issue, we can all agree that it's not good for kids. And we should be doing things to make sure we're protecting young people from a very early age to not make mistakes. And we should be looking at people harmful use that could lead to problems and trying to mitigate that no matter where you are on this particular issue. So much like alcohol with the 21-year-old drinking law, underage drinking and smoking, how do we delay that age of experimentation when it looks, because of the trends, to a young person like it's not only completely they're not only harmless, but maybe in some cases they feel beneficial. And I know that my people, we've had a meeting just the other day about what does this mean now in terms of our work. And from kindergarten to grade 5, it won't make a big difference, really, probably, because we're talking about life skills and making decisions and setting goals and all those different things that we talk about, and not being for them. This is not an activity for them, and stressing that. But parents are going to have to come forward and really make sure that they weigh in on this with their young people.
Right, because even though we're talking about 21 and older, look at the example that is going to be set, I guess. If they see the parents sitting in the house smoking pot or out on the street or at a party, you know, it's going to be a question. It's the same with smoking, and I guess alcohol, pretty much.
Yeah.
Elise, we touched on the business aspect of the law earlier. We've seen how CBD products have become part of our culture along with the dispensing of medical marijuana. So what do we see moving forward on the distribution of recreational marijuana, business-wise?
That's a great question. I actually want to touch quickly on a point that Matt made just regarding, you know, youth use and those under 21. So this bill is obviously for responsible adult use for people over 21 of age. I think it's unrealistic to say, and not that Matt said this, but just that children are most likely going to use this. I think in general, kids have a lot of access to black market marijuana. And so the legalization process helps in that respect, because it'll be incredibly difficult for anyone under 21 to go into a dispensary, given the multiple verification factors that were required to enter in a dispensary before purchasing. I think where we run into youth use is very much in the black market, and hopefully that's curbed through the legalization process, because now we're tackling that at a higher speed. CBD is a huge issue. So just to transition into that topic, CBD is very difficult to manage right now because it really operated in a gray market, meaning people could buy it online. There wasn't an age limit up until very recently for our hemp extraction law that was passed. And, you know, CBD is now managed in New York very well, but it's not managed everywhere very well. So it has a lot of access. I think there's a lot of bad CBD out there, and hopefully we do New York grown, New York processed, and New York purchased to make sure we understand that seed to sale process.
Elise, I'd just like to ask you a question about the marketing tactics that could be employed. In prevention, we've always historically been very worried, cigarettes, alcohol, other substances, about marketing tactics that specifically target kids. Could you speak a little bit about what's in this law to make sure that doesn't happen?
Absolutely. So there's one zoning regulations, right? So you can't have a dispensary that's within 500 feet of school grounds, a playground, daycare center, or 200 feet within a house of worship. They also have labeling and warning requirements, child-proof packaging. And so I think that those are good start. We really have to see more of this come from the rules and regulations in terms of explicit instructions for operators to be using. But overall, you know, and they cracked down on this a lot within the last 5 years since I've been practicing. At first, you would see companies kind of market in a way that's like Sour Patch Kids, you know, gummies, you know, Girl Scout cookies, things that are attractive to minors. And that's been cracked down a lot. You really cannot be having this alluring marketing ploy to children. And, you know, that only obviously comes with trial and error. And so luckily we've had other states kind of make those errors so New York can really crack down on that at the onset.
I think we were relating it to advertising, like for vaping, you know, for the different flavors and whatever. I think it's, you know, we're worried or thinking that it might be the same kind of thing. Now, Elise, if someone's thinking of going into business, what are some of the first steps they're going to have to take, and how regulated is the operation going to be, not only for delivering the anticipated tax revenue, but for operating overall?
Sure. So we're going to have a very interesting licensing scheme. It's not going to be vertically integrated, meaning you wouldn't be able to hold all the licenses. You'll be able to hold some licenses as people who are applying, meaning you could have a grow operation, a processing operation, and be able to distribute your own product, but you wouldn't on the flip side be able to hold retail stores. So right now, as people are kind of gearing up and preparing themselves as operators, hopefully to enter into the New York market, they're kind of weighing their options on whether or not they're better fit for retail stores or better fit to grow, better fit to deliver or to distribute. And so I think depending, and it kind of goes back to opt-out provisions, right, on whether or not any locality is going to allow a retail dispensary, allow an on-site consumption lounge. Your locality, if you don't allow them, you will not be getting the revenue generated from that market. And that's a really important point. And, you know, for those counties or for those cities and localities that may not have enough, you know, that got into a deficit with COVID, are kind of looking forward, and that's kind of a lot of calls I've gotten, are looking forward to the money that they could possibly getting back from that revenue.
Now, from the consumer's point of view, people are saying, well, if there's going to be so many regulation that you have to follow, so many licenses, so many expenses that to legally sell it or dispense it, are people just going to go back on the street and buy it anyway?
You know, that's a really good question. I think that's been a really problematic point when we talk about taxation, when we talk about access and revenue generated. It can't be incredibly expensive because, just like you said, and I'm sure Matt can touch base on this too, when people are looking for their fix or for drugs, or in this case, the black market, are you going to pay $70 for your supply, or would you pay $25? And so you got to kind of meet in the middle. I think 35 is realistic, 40 is realistic to get out of that 25 mark. But if they're exploding in a market with too high of a purchase price, you're totally right. I think black market will continue to thrive. It will not really incentivize operators to move into the legalization process. I'm sure Matt, have you seen a lot of that issue just in terms of accessibility with easier prices?
Well, that's a big way we can help cut back on use. Really, with cigarettes is a great example of this.
Oh, right.
Just making the cigarettes so expensive that people say, "What am I doing?" And cut back. And that's been a very effective method used by the prevention field for forever. So of course we'd like to see it be a little bit more costly because we'd like to see less use, certainly. But your point is well made. The second it's a nickel more, there'll be a propensity to go to a black market to find something cheaper.
There's also the question of quality. So if you're buying it on the black market, as we'll call it, it's not regulated. There's also a question of if you know what you're buying and if it's as safe as all the regulations are going to make it if you're buying it from a legal store.
And all of us have had
distributor.
concerns about, intensity of, dosing, and, if the edibles especially had us concerned because, if a brownie gets sold that serves 4, a person might not necessarily understand that and might just take the whole brownie, for example. So it's, a lot of regulation. Elise is absolutely right. It's very, very necessary, and it has to happen.
Did we already mention that all of this is going to take time, other than the non-criminalization and the possession, the changing the possession laws, but all of the getting it all together and getting the distribution and so forth is going to take time, right? Mm-hmm. People are expecting they're going to walk out tomorrow and on the corner there's going to be a store selling legalized cannabis, but it's not going to happen that way, right?
And as this unfolds from our field, we'll be looking at new challenges as they develop. There's unintended outcomes whenever something like this is launched, and we'll have to be reacting as we go.
Well, by the way, if you would like more information on how to connect with Elise, you can get to the firm's website, barclaydamon.com, and find that information. And Matt, how can people connect with your organization?
Prevention Focus is 884-3256, 884-3256. And people may also reach out to me at msmith@preventionfocus.org.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Elise Bergio from the law firm of Barclay Damon and Matthew Smith from Prevention Focus for joining us on this edition of The Big Picture. Thanks for watching our program, and thanks for watching WBBZ-TV.